Damanhur is a living lab for the future. People come here from all over the world and exchange their research and ideas. Yes and is a way to share their inspiring stories so that we can build a more awakened world together.
Good day, Michael. Thank you for being here with us at Yes and today. I know that as you were growing up, you had three passions: biology, design, and architecture. And
That's
you
right.
find a way to create quite a magical mix of all of them and becoming now quite an avant-garde architect. What did you do? What is your field of expertise?
It was actually biology, design and the environment.
Okay.
Yeah, so as a teenager I wondered about studying biology, but I couldn't see the creative side of it then, so I went to study architecture. And then when I was 30, I was very lucky. I got to work on a project called the Eden Project.
In Cornwall, right?
Yes, which is still, I believe, one of the biggest greenhouses in the world, a very prestigious project. And it was working on that project that made me realise that there was a way to bring those three strands of design, biology and the environment together. And that pursuit is known as biomimicry. So it's design based on biology, looking at how things work in biology and using that as a source of inspiration to develop better solutions that suit humankind.
So that doesn't apply only to architecture, it applies also to engineering, to all kind of systems?
Absolutely, yes. It's applied to engineering, sportswear design, even business. Some businesses are using biomimetic principles to rethink the way they do things.
Yeah, I know there is a field of economy called the blue economy that
That's
actually
right.
looks at the
Yes.
systems of nature and
Yeah.
the idea that there's no need to be any waste because nature has no waste.
Yes, yeah, it's also referred to as the circular economy. Both those terms are in use. I think the circular economy is the term that is becoming more widely known. And biomimicry has a lot to offer there, because by looking at the way that real ecosystems work, which function with high levels of productivity and large flows of resources, but no waste, and it all runs on current solar energy. And in many ways, that's what we should be doing with our cities, looking at how we can shift them from being very linear flows of resources to completely cyclical flows that deliver much more value with the same or even less resources.
This sounds also very connected to the ancient wisdom of the indigenous people, the idea of cycles and being really
Yes.
one with nature.
Yes, yeah, and you could say that a lot of that went wrong in the 20th century when we started adopting a much more sort of short-term way of using things and a very linear, wasteful way of using things. And now I think it's great that so many people are realising that there is an urgent need to rethink that and find cyclical models.
Some say that the nuclear family, mother, father and children as we have today, was actually a result of that industrial revolution that needed buyers.
Okay.
So that transformed also the social systems and how we lived.
Right.
So this is probably going to have an impact also on how we live. Have you ever considered that part or studied the influence on social, tribal, maybe going back to the tribe a little more with this idea of closed systems?
I haven't applied the thinking that much to it, but there's definitely a growing interest in kind of communal ways of living in London now and elsewhere, because housing is so expensive that if you want to move away from your parents' home, then most people just can't afford to buy their own place, so they're finding sort of communal or co-housing models, which have a lot to be said for them actually.
So that's beautiful, because of course in Damanhur we are great advocates of a different way
Sure.
of living, more communal and with a lower impact.
Yes.
And is there some very exciting project you're working on now that makes you think, wow, there really is hope? Because so many people, scientists are now really saying, hey, look, maybe there's no more time. Is there time? And can we have hope?
Well, we certainly have left it very late as a civilization to start addressing the urgent needs of climate change and biodiversity loss and resource shortages and so on. But one of the things I find really inspiring about biomimicry is it just shows how many solutions there are. And at the moment we're working on quite a few projects. So one of them is a textile factory in India, and I think a lot of the time when you say textile factory in India, that probably rings alarm bells, because we've heard horror stories about terrible working environments and so on. But our client here really has a vision for a much better type of building. It's to be a fantastic working environment for everyone in it, with good levels of natural light. And then also we're trying to get as close as possible to zero waste and closed loop on water, and also zero carbon. So all the energy will come from renewable energy. And actually our clothes are one of the perhaps less well-known aspects of our environmental impact. You know, just making a cotton shirt involves colossal amounts of water and often a lot of toxic dyes and so on. So there's an urgent need to rethink industries like that.
Absolutely. Talking about textiles, I don't know if you know, but this area where we're now is called Canavese, which is from the Latin for canvas, from hemp.
Okay,
because we
right.
used to have cultivation of hemp everywhere, and it's something that we are trying to reintroduce because it requires much less water and is much softer on the environment. And again, apparently this was a part of the economic agreements between Italy and the United States at the end of the war, that we would buy their cotton as part of the
Right.
And so all of this industry here has been wiped out, but now there's a lot of effort in trying to bring this back for the environment, and also because it's so important to bring back the ancient culture of these areas. So very interesting that you're doing that in India.
There's another project I'm working on which, believe it or not, is inspired by camels' nostrils.
Really?
So,
like camels like the animal?
So camels have quite an amazing way of recapturing water. And this building is going to capture humidity from the air and then use that to irrigate an oasis garden underneath.
Now you have to help me understand how you go from how a camel breathes to actually design the building. Help us understand a little bit of the steps.
Yeah, well, sometimes with biomimicry, what you do is you define the problem that you're trying to solve. And then you see how that has already been solved in biology.
So in this case, the problem was lack of water?
Well, this way it works the other way around, actually. So the other way of using biomimicry is you just have a kind of curious mind and a good sort of radar. And when you see a biological organism that does something amazing, you think, I know what I could do with that. So I learnt about the camel's nostrils first. And essentially what they do is as they breathe in the dry desert air, they have these very intricate passageways in their noses which evaporate moisture into the air, so it's less of a shock to the system. And then as they breathe out, that warm humid air passes the same surfaces which are cool because of evaporation, and then a lot of that moisture condenses and is recaptured by the camel. So we're using similar principles to extract moisture from humid air. So in many parts of the Middle East, at sunset, the humidity rises to close to 100% humidity. And then all you have to do is lower the temperature and provide good condensation surfaces, and then you can capture water from humid air.
Well, this sounds amazing. And what would it look like? Like this kind of systems, I suppose they would have an impact also on the actual design of the buildings.
Yes, unfortunately there's not much I can show you about it yet because it's still a little bit confidential. But it's a kind of large canopy roof, and then it has this intricate pattern of fins which are based on the camel's nostrils, so that those are the water collection surfaces.
So it will look beautiful, and it will become and it will become a trademark, not just because it is the highest tower in the world, but because it's really
So it'd be less about trying to be the biggest,
the
most
tallest,
expensive, but we're trying to be the cleverest in some ways, I guess.
And you mentioned now the most expensive. In relation to normal way of buildings, is this much more expensive? Is it still something very exclusive, or is some systems that we can think of applying to larger?
It depends on the project. So biomimicry doesn't have to be more expensive. Sometimes it's much cheaper. On the Eden project, we used biomimicry to design a very lightweight structure, and it was a third of the cost of a more conventional glass and steel structure. So for large span buildings, it can be much cheaper, and also for buildings that deal with large flows of resources, whether that's energy, water, waste, food, etc. Often biomimicry can show solutions that are significantly cheaper. And then for other building types, like we did an office building using biomimicry, and that was about 15 to 20% more expensive, but we'd agreed with the client, based on market research, he was confident that he could get 20 to 25% more rental value or sale value.
Where is this building?
Hopefully it'll be in Switzerland. It's
Are you building it?
Well, it's not under construction yet. We're still
in designing
waiting.
phase.
The design is pretty much complete. We're just waiting for some funding.
Oh, right. And what was the problem you wanted to solve through biomimicry?
For the office?
Yes.
Well, for the office, we tried to use it completely comprehensively. So we looked at all the different aspects of an office. So we looked at the structure, we looked at how to bring light in, how to heat it, how to get good air quality, etc., etc. And then we studied how all of those problems have been addressed by different biological organisms, and we used that to rethink the way the office building was designed. So, for instance, we used ideas from a type of fish called a spookfish, which has mirror-shaped structures in its eyes, and we used that to design this large mirror in the centre, in the atrium, that would bounce light deeper into the lower parts of the building.
Wow. So now, do you have enough cases of buildings that you have that you can say, okay, if I have to do this, I know I can draw from that, because I've done it already and it works. So every time you're trying to find something new, because still this is a pioneering phase and maybe it's more exciting.
Well, we've definitely built up a good sort of reserve of proven solutions. Anytime we get a new challenge, a new building type that we haven't worked on before, then we kind of go back to first principles, and we always try to work with a biologist. And actually the broader team, I always try and put together teams of polymaths, people who are good at thinking outside just the narrow constraints of their own discipline and can think within other people's disciplines. And I find that creates the richest possible design dialogue.
Now we've been talking about buildings, but of course buildings very often are used by humans most times.
Yeah.
Have you also run tests about how humans feel, if they feel differently in a building that functions like that? And what have you discovered?
We haven't done that on one of our buildings, but there are quite a lot of experiments that have been done researching the same principles. So for instance, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that humans are happier and more relaxed and more productive if they're in regular contact with nature, or even in contact with natural forms and associations with biology. So the data on that's pretty good. And there's also very good data on the benefits of, say, daylight in a working environment.
Great. So if you could encapsulate this, what would be the greatest lesson you learned from nature when it comes to architecture?
It's hard to choose a single example because there's just so many. And in some ways, that's the most powerful lesson that I've learned, that actually there's just a vast range of solutions, even in quite surprising areas like fire safety. I mean, who would have thought that you could find a beetle that can detect a forest fire at a much greater range than man-made fire detectors? Who would have thought that a bombardier beetle could inspire a new type of fire sprinkler that uses 1/10 of the amount of water to achieve equivalent levels of fire safety? So it's an amazing resource of ideas that's still largely untapped.
Fantastic. So now you're here in Damanhur. Is there anything that you've seen here that inspired you for maybe new ideas or new insights that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I've been enormously impressed by the temples. I mean, to see what you as a community have done is astonishing. And I was contacted by Damanhur, and I also read about Damanhur in a book called Atlas Obscura, which is a guide to some of the most amazing places around the world. So I was enormously impressed with that. And also, I really like the idea of trying to build something for a very long timescale, thinking in long timescales rather than just thinking on a 10 or 20-year timescale, thinking about building something that will still be there in 500 to 1,000 years and will still be communicating important meanings. I find that inspiring.
Well, thank you. And if people want to get inspired more by what you're doing, where can they go? On the internet, what can they be looking at so that they can see the solutions you are exploring?
There's a fantastic book.
That you wrote?
Yes.
Fantastic,
called
great.
Biomimicry and Architecture. But more generally, if people want to look into biomimicry, there's a very good online resource called asknature.org. So
asknature.org.
So you can put in a question like, I don't know, how would biology find water in a desert or something like that. And then it shows you biological organisms that have solved that problem. So that resource is intended for much more than just architects. It's people across all sorts of disciplines. And then there are quite a few talks now online about biomimicry. So 10 years ago there wasn't that much. Now there's actually quite a lot that you can look into.
So let's hope we can have a new generation of architects, all with the love of nature and humans in their hearts.
That would be good.
Thank you so much.